I'm alive by the crackle of this transmitter, though I'm not entirely sure how. Outside, the world has unraveled. The sky once a gentle bloom now glows like embers, a molten bruise pressed against the horizon, smoke from endless scrub. Fires drifts in sickly plumes across the heavens, tinting every breath we take. Rain hasn't fallen in over 2 years. The rivers dried to dust, and the ground fractured like old paint. Cities lie in ruins. What was New York's skyline steel giants reaching for the stars is now a jagged silhouette against ash-gray skies. Glass windows shattered long ago, shards scattered across cracked sidewalks. The Metropolitan Museum's marble lions lie, headless, toppled by scavengers who stripped marble walls for crude shelter. Beyond them, Central Park is a grate of dead roots and withered grass, its fountains half submerged in sand. Out west, the Colorado River vanished entirely, leaving canyon. Rings of white chalk where muddy rapids once thundered. Las Vegas sits abandoned, neon signs flickering feebly before giving out in silence. Once lavish casinos have become camps for scavenger tribes who barter preserved food for batteries and scraps of metal. They roam the streets like ghosts, faces bandaged against the dust. Floods came first sudden walls of water that swallowed entire coastal towns, then drought struck back. Now, the coast is a jagged ruin, harbor cranes bent like broken limbs, ships marooned on dry docks. In Miami, the ocean retreated so far that beaches are rings of cracked coral. Of government is a skeleton. In Washington, D.C., Union Station's grand halls echo emptiness. Congress is scattered, its delegates hiding in fortified enclaves beneath the Capitol's shattered dome. No federal relief arrives, here just static and abandoned promises. I've heard of the coalition down south, an uneasy alliance of farmers and engineers who defend a dwindling reservoir, clashing with the harvesters. Raiders who drive solar panel trucks and demand fuel by force. Every highway is a gauntlet. Convoys off truck, half-armored bus move in stuttering progress. Armed lookouts scanning the horizon for ambush. I remember driving these roads before the collapse. Smooth asphalt, billboards screaming for soft drinks. Now bullet-pocked walls of concrete stand guard at makeshift checkpoints. Beyond them, the desert stretches to a horizon of heat waves that shimmer like ghosts. Here, in what was once the Midwest, the fields lie fallow. Cornstalks first withered under unrelenting heat, then vanished entirely when locusts, mutated by climate shocks swept through by the billions. Towns fell silent. Barns collapsed under the weight of dust. Now, folk cluster in repurposed grain silos, turning them into vertical farms under flickering LED grow lights scavenged from abandoned greenhouses. They cultivate algae, fungi, anything that will keep the bellies full. Communication networks are spotty. My little transmitter is a relic I keep alive with hand-cranked generators. Radios purr with static fragments of other survivors. Maybe a distress call, maybe a raider's threat. Every word is precious. I broadcast on 87.5 FM because it's open space. I speak into this mic, hoping anyone still listens. Nature itself fights back. Wildfires rage across what used to be Oregon's coast. flames roaring through charred pine until only the trees' skeletons remain. I've seen ash snowing through the air, turning day into dusk, and the storm's electric. Storms flash without rain, bolts of bluish lightning dancing across empty horizons, and fry the circuits of solar pumps. The landmarks that once bound us to memory are gone. The Golden Gate Bridge stands half submerged in creeping dunes of sand, its cables snapping in the wind. The Eiffel Tower's iron legs sink into the Seine's murky floodplain, water levels rising then receding in endless cycles. Beijing's Forbidden City is half collapsed, its ornate rooftops bowed under grit and grime. Survivor groups cling to scraps of hope. Some hoard water behind earthen dams patched with plastic tarps. Others guard rare seeds' heritage grains that might one day repopulate these barren soils. Scavengers trade medicine aspirin, antibiotics plucked from hospital pharmacies that have long since given up their ghosts. Institutions have dwindled to the essentials. Makeshift clinics in shipping containers, bartered schools taught by wandering teachers, radio networks like mind knitting together broken souls. Faith has splintered too. Prayer circles now share vigil with doomsday cults who claim only aliens can save us. Anxiety hums in every breath. We wait and dread the next collapse, the next wildfire, the next storm, or the next alien signal. Because now, in the static, I've heard something new, a pattern in the cosmic noise that isn't natural. First contact tore the beginning of the end. The air tastes of dust and desperation. But I speak into this microphone anyway because telling our story may be the first spark of hope left. And as long as that ember glows, maybe we'll find a way to survive what comes next. I'm Miles Harrington, if you're still out there, and this is my confession, my testament, and my warning. Before all this, I was an electrical engineer in Chicago, building circuits, chasing efficiencies, living in a cramped apartment with my wife. And our daughter, Anna, we believed in progress, in skyscrapers reaching higher, in the hum of the grid carrying life's steady rhythm. Now, I'm a voice in the static, and the only hum I know is the sputtering of a hand-cranked generator powering this transmitter. By day, I'm a scavenger. My bike once, my weekend toy, has been jury-rigged into a lean, two-wheeled steel beast that hauls panniers stuffed with scavenged solar cells, spare wiring, used batteries, and the occasional can of algae paste. I pedal across cracked asphalt, past half-collapsed overpasses, greeting empty houses with hollowed-out windows like maws waiting to swallow me. In each one, I flip through dusty cabinets, old engineering manuals, moldy rice, sometimes a half-dead battery that becomes my lifeline. By night, I'm a broadcaster. I talk into this mic because the silence kills me faster than the dust storms. I spin weather reports, northeast winds, ash showers, patchy, but I also tell stories, news of a tentative bloom of mushrooms in a sealed silo to the north, or the radio operator in Phoenix who traded her last aspirin for an LED bulb. I riff on poetry, Keats, Dickinson. I recite lines that once seemed beautiful, now taste like iron in my mouth. Session 4, whoever's tuning in. And for me, what drives me isn't fame or record setting. Listener counts. It's responsibility. I know the world outside is dying, but knowledge is oxygen. If I can tell one child how to filter water with charcoal and sand, or warn a convoy of raiders moving through the canyon. Maybe I save one life every time someone responds a crackle on the line, a coded Roger, or stay safe. Miles, it's like a glimpse of sunrise in this crimson-hazed hell. I lost my family the day the storms rolled in. We were on our way south, chasing a rumor of a sealed reservoir still holding water. Anna, 6 years old, was humming a lullaby she'd learned from her mother. Then the skies opened with electric fury lightning bolts that struck metal beams. The car's engine stalled, and the rain that did fall was toxic, laced with ash and chemicals. My wife grabbed Anna and ran into the storm to find shelter. I turned back, for the generator hour lifeline and black rain swallowed them both. I found Anna's backpack days later, empty except for her favorite stuffed giraffe. I still carry it here, beside the radio. Some nights, the guilt nearly crushes me. I imagine them wandering in that acid rain, seeking shelter that never came. But every morning I wake up in my makeshift bunkera basement of a strip mall, walls lined with batteries and growlet sand. I force myself to turn the crank, because giving up would be an insult to their memories. Keeping this station alive is my way of atoning. I've watched my own mind fray. I talk to this mic as though it were her voice, though I know it's only the echo of mine. I've caught myself responding to imaginary fellow survivors. Copy that. How's your generator holding? From sinking its claws in, but there are real voices out there. A young woman in Boise teaches Morse code to orphaned children. A scientist in Houston trials a solar desalination rig. A farmer in Iowa auctions off seeds under cover of darkness. We barter via airwaves data for stories. Hope for the next broadcast. Cloth, charcoal, sand 3 stages. I grow in sealed tanks lit by salvaged LEDs, mixing it into algae paste that tastes like damp cardboard but keeps my blood moving. I harvest rats for protein when stores are empty, circuit boards. Yet I still recharge battered laptops and radios by day, and by night I read old physics papers to remember what this world once was. Hope is a strategy. Some mornings I watch ash drift through the cracked skylight, sun reduced to an angry orange dot. I could crumble, but instead I write a poem into the mic. Even embers glow beneath the ash. It's a mantra. Sometimes I stumble over the words voice, cracking, but I press on, and every time I do, I feel a little more human. There are days when I consider hunting down a real community, maybe the coalition in the South, maybe the desert commune in New Mexico, rumored to be thriving on fungus farms and offering my skills, radio, engineering, my endless stubbornness. But I've heard how they guard their borders, shifting minefields of radio jamming, armed patrols, NORAD zones. They're afraid I might carry disease or raider spies. So I stay here, broadcasting on 87.5 FM, uninvited but persistent. Like a stray dog howling at empty windows, my losses have taught me to embrace fragility. A jar of clean water is as precious as a first edition book. A working transistor radio is a lifeline, not a gadget. A single bar of soap is celebrated like a harvest festival. I keep mementos, a gold wedding band I found in a riverbank, a page torn from Anna's coloring book showing her smiling stick figure family. I tape them beside my generator as talismans. I don't know if that makes me sane or mad, but here's the truth. Some nights, when the switch clicks off generator drained, batteries dead end, It's only me and the hush of this hollow mall. I don't feel alone. I feel every lost soul who ever spoke into a microphone. I feel the breath of Anna before the storm. I feel the murmur of earth beneath her rubble. And I feel, faintly, the weight of another presence-a signal in the static. That isn't human. First contact. I don't know if they're saviors or annihilators, but I'm ready. I'll greet them with a wire-worn transmitter and a voice that refuses to give up. I'll tell them our story, how we rose like a pulse against the dying world, how hope ignited in the hum of a generator, how even a broken broadcast can bind us together, because if they come, they'll need to hear who we were and who we still can become. So yeah, that's me. Miles Harrington, engineer, scavenger, broadcaster, broken by loss, healed by purpose. I survive by telling our story, because as long as someone listens, I know none of us is truly lost. The drought has lasted nearly 3 years now, 3 crushing cycles of sun and dust that have baked the world into a brittle husk. Every sunrise brings temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. The air shimmers like a desert mirage, even in places that once knew snow. The scorched earth cracks into deep fissures, splitting fields into impossible jigsaw puzzles that swallow water before it even touches the soil. We've measured rainfall in mere milliliters per month, enough to dampen the dust for a few hours, but never enough to refill wells or refill parched rivers. Every day. The basics slip further beyond reach. Water. My small cistern holds 3 liters per person per day, just enough to rinse a pan, wet cloth for cooling, and swallow with a single mouthful of algae paste. I've rigged a solar still from old acrylic panes and a black tarp, but it yields less than half a liter a day. During the heat waves, evaporation outpaces condensation. The stills become useless trays of grit. I collect dew at dawn, 6 drops. On a nylon sheet, wiped off with a sponge, but dew is luxury, not lifeline. Food spirulina paste has sustained me longer than I thought humanly possible, but it's low on calories. I supplement with preserved insects, mealworms, farmed in plastic tubs, and the occasional rat I trap in the rubble. When I find canned goods beans, fruit cocktail, they're often burst, rusted, or poisoned by heat. I ration at 400 calories per meal. 2 meals a day, just enough to keep the generator cranking and my legs pedaling, fuel and power. My hand-cranked generator saves precious diesel, but it can only recharge batteries, not power grow lights or solar pumps. I scavenge photovoltaic cells by the handful, broken panels pieced together into small arrays that run LED bulbs for 12 hours each night. Fuel for truly heavy lift trucks, water pumps, has vanished. Raiders steal whatever they can't carry. The roadsides littered with torched engines and drained tanks. These aren't thunderstorms, they're convective infernos. Hot, dry winds rake the plains, lifting dust and dead grass into roiling walls 10 meters high. I've watched one swallow an entire convoy, rattling trucks like toys and leaving skeletons of steel behind. The dust blocks out the sun for days. Temperatures plummet at night by 20 degrees, only to spike back up by dawn. We call them black breath storms, because breathing in that choking dust can kill you silently. Pulmonary fibrosis, acute inflammation, collapse of lung tissue days later. When the storms finally cool the upper atmosphere, they draw whatever. Chemicals remain industrial runoff, pesticide residues into the clouds. The rain that splatters against sun-cracked asphalt burns like acid. We catch runoff in barrels, lined with limestone, gravel, and charcoal. A multi-stage filter that neutralizes some acidity, but yields only enough to fill a single jug. Even then, I have to test the pH with litmus strips scavenged from a school. Lab, if it reads below 5, I won't risk the batch. The scrublands ignite spontaneously branches too dry to hold moisture snap in the heat, sparking against rock. Wildfires leap across hundreds of kilometers with frightening speed, driven by the hot storms. Each blaze leaves behind not ash, but a glassy, vitrified crust where the minerals in soil have melted. Nothing grows until that glass weathers away. In some places, my lead-lit fungus farm relies on soil imported from deep underground mines. Without it, the cultures collapse too. The last regional power station shut down 2 winters ago. Frozen pipes burst and turbines seized. What remains of the grid is a tangle of live lines, dangerous, unpredictable. I've found 2 working transformers in abandoned substations. One powers my radio shack on crank-assisted battery storage. Beyond that, everyone else fights over. Fuel for rusted generator sets convoys guarded by ex-soldiers turned mercenaries. I learned to track the crisis in data, like a scientist turned survivor. Atmospheric CO, surpassing 550 ppm, has driven the baseline temperature up by plus 2.3 degrees Celsius since the collapse began. Soil moisture deficits over 80% force plants into dormancy. Entire biomes have shifted into brown zones where no photosynthesis occurs. Frequency of extreme heat days has quintupled. The planet now experiences over 120 days per year above 45 degrees Celsius. I recite these numbers on air not to spook listeners, but to help them plan. When you know that the hottest window runs from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., you schedule scavenging at dawn and dusk. When you measure soil salinity with a makeshift TDS, meter-broken wires around a scrap of platinum, the results dictate which pockets of ground to avoid digging for tubers. Every circuit board I repair bears microcracks from heat stress. Solar panels delaminate. Rubber gaskets in pumps lose elasticity. My toolkit is whittled down 2 pliers, a Swiss Army knife, and a spool of copper wire. When something goes, I have to jury-rig a replacement or go without dot. My body struggles under chronic dehydration. I wear a cooling vest stuffed with phase change materials salvaged from refrigeration trucks. When ice vaporizes, it draws heat away. But I can only recharge the ice by risking exposure to toxic rain at night. Every broadcast chips away at my sanity. The need to warn others, to share research protocols for water filtration and soil reclamation, competes with the crushing loneliness and grief for my family. When the speaker hums between messages, I can almost hear Anna's laughter until it snaps me back to the microphone. Listeners, here's what to do right now. Stage 1, cloth filter fold, a clean shirt into 4 layers. Pour water slowly. Stage 2, charcoal, trench gravel, and activated charcoal in alternating layers, 6 inches deep. Stage 3, UV sterilization. Expose a clear plastic bottle to direct sunlight for 3 hours. Rotate every half hour. stay below 45 degrees Celsius by resting in shaded areas between scavenging runs. Wear lightweight, loose-fitting clothing in light colors. Cover head and neck with damp cloth. Use cooling vest or improvise with wet towels in Ziploc bags against pulse points wrists, neck. Test salinity. Dip a wire probe into soil slurry. If taste is bitter and conductivity high, move to a different patch. Amend with gypsum from concrete rubble. Calcium sulfate helps leach out salts. Mix in organic matter. Collect leaf litter from shaded ravines. Compost in plastic barrels for 4 weeks. Scavenge lead-acid batteries from UPS units. Wire in parallel for increased capacity watch for heat generation. Harvest silicone from burnt-out PV panels. Scrape cells from backing. Solder together. In small strips, conserve charge by running electronics only at night. Shield devices in aluminum foil to reduce thermal stress. Remember, every ounce you save multiplies your chances. Coordinate with neighbors on 87.5 FM for barter seeds, for ammo, water for wiring, skill for shelter. You're not alone. I can see the stakes rising every hour. The pipeline that once carried coolant to this region has fractured. No one dares seize control of the pump station under the threat of raiders armed with gasoline flamethrowers. Meanwhile, the sky flashes with alien signals patterns that crackle through the static just after midnight. I've analyzed the frequencies. They align with no known natural source, repeating prime number pulses that pierce the noise floor. If it's first contact, it's happening as we starve and thirst ourselves toward extinction. I finish each program with a countdown. Next broadcast in 6 hours. Send your Morse code at dot-dash. Then I sit in the hush, listening for replies and feeling the weight of every second until dawn. Because by sunrise, the crucible of the next heat wave will melt whatever hope we manage to stoke overnight. Every night, the crisis deepens. Every broadcast, we inch closer to the precipice or the breakthrough, and I keep sharing data, tactics, and warnings. Because in the harsh calculus of survival, knowledge is the last resource that truly never runs out. The air presses against my lungs like a live thing-in, unrelenting weight of dust and heat that hammers every breath. I woke before dawn in the radio shack, heart pounding from the tremor of last night's quake. The ground outside had shifted again, ripping apart the concrete foundation beneath our bunker and shearing cables from the generator. I spent 2 hours kneeling in the rubble by headlamp, crawling through the dust to rewire the hand crank alternator. My knuckles cracked on broken ceramics, and I thought I'd lost feeling in my fingertips. But finally, that familiar hum returned, and I exhaled. It felt like a victory until I checked the cistern's gauge, down to 15 liters. Enough water to drink 3 days if I ration strictly and less. A heat wave wipes out my dew traps, or a leak drains the main tank overnight. Yesterday, I discovered a pinhole in one of the seams. I patched it with a scrap of tire, inner tube, and epoxy, but I pray the patch holds under pressure. Every leak is a betrayal. By mid-morning, the sun was a burning coin overhead. I strapped on my cooling vestits phase change crystals, barely clinging to the last of their chillend, pedaled out across the cracked pavement toward the next settlement. A cluster of grain silos 50 kilometers east, the scavenger's life, always pedaling, always hunting for scraps of power, seeds, or water. My panniers were half empty, and the weight of empty space felt heavier than any load. I passed an overturned semi, its trailer door pried open and stripped of scrap metal. Pockets of rusted cans lay scattered across the highway beams, peaches, even infant formula. But exposed to sun for years, the tins had corroded to dust. I rummaged through the debris anyway, finding 2 dented tins whose seals held. They'll fetch a high price in the bunker. A distant roar rattled the heat haze, a convoy of raiders. I dove behind a collapsed billboard, heart hammering. They zipped past an armored truck's modified harvesters painted black, windshields replaced by mesh, gun barrels poked from turret ports. They don't spare travelers. I counted 7 vehicles, each carrying 6 men in bone dust masks, rifles slung. There, the harvesters, known for ripping solar panels from roofs and torching villages that resist. My skin crawled. Halfway through the convoy, one truck lurched to a stop. The crew dismounted, spilling into the asphalt like locusts. They fanned out, searching the wreck. I pressed my face to the billboard's corrugated steel, gasping through my mask's filter. A pair of them grabbed a ratchet and hacked at the semi's axle. Another lit a flare, tossing it into the dry brush. Minutes later, the fire roared upward orange tongues, licking the sky, forcing me back. I watched ash swirl as the raiders piled into trucks and roared off, leaving smoke and ruin behind. I pressed on, sweat pouring down my back, the roar of fire receding with their tires. By the time I reached the silos, my mouth tasted of metal. The community there called themselves the Green Capso, named for the moss they cultivate on rooftop gardens. I found the entrance guarded by 2 watchers with scavenged rifles. They e-rolled me when I arrived, but at least they didn't chase me off. Inside, the light was dim lead strips lining the steel walls of the tallest silo. They cultivate mushrooms under glare lamps, powered by a small PV array on the roof. Across 3 tiers, trays of oyster and shiitake fungi glowed pale. Down below, they keep tanks of spirulina and rows of lettuce under tinted glass. Water comes from an underground aquifer tapped by a battered pump. They only use it for irrigation. Drinking water is still rationed. I traded the tins of peaches for 2 liters of filtered water and a handful of moss plugs to patch my cooling vest. I also asked about their generator. It had died weeks ago. They said they'd been broadcasting on intermittent battery power, hopping frequencies to avoid detection by harvesters. They whispered rumors of a new water source, an old nuclear plant's cooling ponds north of here that might still hold uncontaminated water. I filed that away like a hot lead. A nuclear site felt like a double-edged sword, but at this point, even the tainted pools of cooling water seemed more valuable than another ration. Still, the risk of radiation sickness is real. I imagine the bartered dosimeter they'd need if they even have one, and the Geiger counter's frantic hiss as they dip a sample. I spent the night sleeping on a makeshift cot beside the mushrooms, dreaming of steam tunnels and glowing green liquids. But dawn brought another ordeal. The heat wave arrived early. Temperatures rocketed past 50 degrees by 10 a.m., and the silo's airlocks began to warp under stress. Ventilation fans hummed furiously, but the temperature inside climbed by the hour. I packed my moss plugs and water, hugged the caretaker goodbye, and pedaled back as fast as my legs could spin. By noon, the highway shimmered, I stopped under the lean of a ruined overpass, crouched in its shadow, and lowered my cooling vest into a bucket of water. The fabric hissed as ice crystals vapored. I draped it over my shoulders and felt relief, like someone had poured water down my spine. Even then, I glanced nervously at the horizon. Dark shapes gathering in the dust. A storm. This wasn't a normal dust storm. It hissed with electricity, the sky crackling as bolt after bolt of blue-white lightning lit the empty fields. I'd seen these convective storms before, heat-borne hurricanes with no rain, a deadly cascade of charged particles. They can fry unshielded electronics, collapse the weakest shelters, ignite fires across miles. I pedaled like a madman, head down, mouth clamped around the mask. But the storm caught me 10 kilometers out, wind ripping at my vest, lightning dancing on the metal racks of my bike. I dove off the road into a ditch and huddled behind a collapsed concrete barrier, praying the barrier was large enough to shield me. A strike burst the air above me like a cannon, and for a moment I felt my heart stutter. When the storm passed, as suddenly as it arrived, I rolled over. My bike lay on its side, rack twisted. The solar cells were shattered, wiring scorched. I checked the patch on my vest intact. Thank God, but the battery cells in my pannier had burst. I felt tears sting in my eyes. If the cells are gone, I lose lighting at night and the ability to filter water in the solar still. I lie there for 10 minutes, heart pounding, body shaking in the midday hush. Then I crawled back to the bike and began jerry-rigging. I scavenged pieces of silicone from the broken panels, wrapped shards of copper wire in weathered insulation, and twisted together what I could. By nightfall, I had a tiny barely enough to power one LED for 4 hours. It's pathetic, but it's something. I strapped the bulbs to my helmet and continued broadcasting in dim, pinging bursts. On air, I described the storm's behavior, how the ionized dust created a Faraday cage effect, trapping charge and amplifying the lightning. I warned listeners to shield their radio gear in metal containers. I offered to trade blueprints for makeshift surge protectors. Silvered mylar from a downed communications dish could line boxes and divert current to ground rods. I asked for any responses. There was only staticant. A new voice crackled. In Morse code, ... The pattern repeated. At first, I thought it was momentary interference, but then it spelled out SOS, and beneath that, 3 letters I didn't recognize. QZ9. No known station uses QZ9. That call sign must belong to a private outfit tour, something else entirely. The tone was urgent, pleading. I replied in code, "Identify yourself." The next reply came scrambled, broken, water, plant, north. Then the line went dead. My pulse jumped. An unknown station claiming water, plant, north. If they really meant a planta processing facility or a pond north of here that might sync with rumors of that nuclear site. But it could also be a Trappa harvester's ambush bait, or worse. And if it came from an alien source, those same signals I've tracked for weeks, maybe it's something none of us have ever encountered. Suddenly, the night felt colder, the bunker emptier. I sat in that single LED glow, code buzzing through my headphones, and felt the old fear return. Can I trust this voice? Will following it save lives, or lead me to a death trap? I spent the next 2 hours mapping coordinates, triangulating reception strength on 3 successive broadcasts. The source seems to lie 200 kilometers north in the foothills of the old Rocky Mountains. That's a 3-day ride through territory I know is infested by harvesters. No air support, no backup, just me and my patched bike, 2 liters of water, some algae paste, and a head full of numbers. I recorded my findings and added it to the broadcast. QZ9 reports water source at 39.123 N. 106.456 W. Proceed with extreme caution. No confirmation of radiation levels. Potential ambush site. I finished with my usual sign-off. Miles. Harrington. Clear skies but check your kits for lightning rods. When I ended the transmission, my throat felt raw. I took a swig of algae paste, my last pouch. I have no more. I chewed on the gristly paste, dry as dust, and stared into the glow of the single LED. In the hush, I imagined Anna's laughter, the feel of her small hand in mine. I saw my wife's smile. Then I centered myself. This is why I go on. This is why I broadcast. To chase that ember of hope, even if it's just a phantom flicker. Tomorrow, I'll gather what I can. More water, some moss plugs, extra wiring, and I'll ride north. I'll face whatever lies at that coordinate. Water, radiation, raiders, or something else. Because survival isn't about playing it safe. It's about pushing forward when every part of you wants to curl up and die. I stand at the precipice of a new mysteria, possible lifeline, or a deadly snare. The odds are slim. But if I don't try, there's no chance at all. And so I will face the dawn, pedal into unknown territory, and carry this battered transmitter with me, 'cause in the end, all we have is the story we tell and the connections we make. And somewhere out there, the voice of QZ9 waits on the same wavelength. So tomorrow, at first light, I ride. My heart thrums with dread and resolve in equal measure. The world beyond the bunker holds more dangers than I've ever known, but also, perhaps, the spark that ignites our return from the ashes. And through it all, I will speak for every lost soul, for my family, and for every listener who dares to tune in. Because hope, like water, is worth chasing even when it means riding headlong into the storm. The first light of dawn was a lie. The horizon glowed blood orange, promising only another day of relentless heat. But I clipped my patched cooling vest into place and mounted my bike. Every spoke creaked in protest, and the tires worn 2 thin scars whispered over the gravel. As I rolled northward toward QZ9's coordinates, 39.123 N, 106.456 W. By mid-morning, the foothills of the Rockies loomed ahead. Jagged ridges framed by a sky so empty it felt carved from bone. I'd drunk the last of my water the night before, rationing my 2 liters to a single swig at every sunrise simulation in my mind. 1 sip equals 10 more minutes of life. Hunger gnawed at my gut, but hunger was old news. Thirst was a new demon. At 11 o'clock, I came upon the first sign, a collapsed guardrail on a hairpin turn, its paint blistered by heat, metal twisted back as if scorched with God's anger. Beside it lay fresh footprints in the dust bootprints with M65 tread still sharply defined. Raiders or greencaps scouts? I couldn't tell. I crouched behind a boulder, heart hammering, and watched 2 figures emerge from the scrub brush below. They wore military fatigues, dust-bleached and patch-tanned, carried long rifles draped by slings. One shifted something on his back, a bulky pack with a cylindrical protrusion, a water filter, a makeshift Geiger counter. They moved deliberately toward the valley's low point. I swallowed past the dust in my throat and lifted my mic, QZ9. This is Miles Harrington. I'm 5 clicks north, following your trail. Respond if you can. I tapped the PTT button. Only static answered. The pair vanished around a rocky outcrop. I waited a minute, then rolled forward on tiptoe, eyes flicking for traps. Beneath the ridge, the ground sloped into a shallow basin. At its center was a crumbling concrete pad, ringed by the rusted skeleton of a pipeline. A half-buried plaque. Read, North Fork Nuclear Generating Station, Cooling Pond number 3. My breath caught. The pond itself was gone, drained off, or evaporated long ago, but in the sunken berm lay 2 pools of standing water, temples of algae and bacterial bloom. One pool shimmered emerald green, the other was a dull, oily black. A battered plastic hose snaked from the black pool into a makeshift valve box, half submerged in muck. Footsteps behind me made me spin. The 2 soldiers stood 10 meters away, rifles raised. The taller one, his face coated in dust and exhaustion, spoke first. State your business, he said, voice low and cautious. I raised my hands, palms out. Miles Harrington, broadcaster. I followed QZ9's signal. You sent the code about water. He exchanged a look with his partner. The shorter woman lowered her rifle, but kept her finger on the trigger guard. You alone. Alone. No raider. Convoy. No harvesters. She studied me, eyes flickering with something hope, maybe, or suspicion. We're the Water Guard Collective. We maintain these ponds, testing contaminant levels. This one, she pointed at the oily pool, is raw coolant runoff, too radioactive for consumption without heavy decontamination. I remembered the rumors, nuclear cooling water, once thought contaminated, but if treated with the right filtration and ion exchange resins, perhaps salvageable. What about the green one? She shrugged. Bioremediation trial. Cyanobacteria feed on heavy metals and radionuclides. After months, levels drop below safe thresholds. This is week 20, my pulse thundered. 20 weeks, that's 5 months of constant maintenance, filtering out isotopes, harvesting algae. And here it was, water, possibly safe, enough to refill 1,000 cisterns, enough to change the game for countless survivors. But standing in the basin, I could feel the ambient radiation humming through my bones, a faint, metallic ache. I glanced down at my vest's patched panels, at the moss plugs dangling from my belt. All of it would need sterilization afterward. The taller soldier, arms crossed, broke the silence. We called on QZ9 for assistance. We need power to run the ion exchange pumps. Our solar farm was raided 2 nights ago. I swallowed. My patched solar cells were barely enough to light an LED, but if I could, jury-rig something here, scavenge panels from my route, hook them up in series, it might run a small pump long enough to process a few hundred liters per day. I can help, I said, voice tight. Show me your rig. I've got wiring, spare inverters, a hand crank generator. We could adapt. Their relief was palpable. The woman exhaled, shoulders sliding down. You're our first helper in months. If this works, we can send filtered water downrange. The second I knelt beside the control panel, checking wiring diagrams scrawled on water-stained blueprints, I realized what this meant. If I allocate my limited parts to this project, my own rig back at the bunker will die. No lights, no radio, until I scavenge more. My audience, my reason for living will vanish until I return. A choice pressed on me. Preserve my sanctuary, my solitary broadcast, or invest in a communal hope that might save thousands but leave me in darkness. Heat waves flickered the horizon, and in that flicker I saw Anna's face, her smile half hidden in the colors of dawn. I saw my wife's hand brushing my cheek. I felt their absence as acutely as the sun's weight. I pressed my palm to the hot metal of the panel and felt a jolt of resolve. I'll give you everything I have, I said. The taller soldier nodded, eyes glinting. The next 6 hours blurred into circuits, wiring splices, and the hiss of solder on hot panels. We scavenged 5 broken PV cells from my panniers, stripped and relaminated them under glass from the valve, box window. We wired them into a makeshift array on the guardrail's remains. I reconfigured the hand crank generator so it could charge a battery bank and run the tiny pumps in short bursts. As noon heat peaked, the first drip of filtered water ticked into a sanitized drum. By mid-afternoon, we had 10 liters. By dusk, 50 enough, if sustained, to fill 55-gallon barrels every week. Enough to keep half a dozen settlements alive. In the golden glow of sunset, my vests melting, crystals long gone recorded a brief broadcast. This is Miles Harrington, live from the North Fork cooling pond. We have potable water, 50 liters today, expected to rise to 200 by next week. I'll post wiring schematics and code for makeshift ion exchange cartridges on 87.5 FM in tonight's update. Tag your fuel rations and vocalize your gratitude. This is collective survival in action. Pass the word, not just the barrels. I hesitated before pushing end. My finger hovered over the button. The weight of what I'd given up my own safety. My bunker's power pressed on me, but I pressed down, static. We've won a reprieve from thirst for now, and if this signal reaches you, you are not alone. I leaned back against the concrete, sweat cooling on my skin. Above me, stars pocked the deepening sky. For the first time since the collapse, I felt a surge of something I thought lost. Pride, purpose, connection. The water guard soldiers gathered empty jerry cans and began filling them for the night convoy. They offered me water, but I shook my head. Use it for the pumps. I'll scavenge more tomorrow. They saluted, half grin, half Tarzan. I watched their figures recede into the dusk. Jerry cans balanced on shoulders, each step lighter than mine. Left alone, I stood in the basin, the hum of ambient radiation, a gentle thrum at the base of my skull. The cooling pond stirred, algae swirling in emerald currents, as if celebrating its own survival. I closed my eyes and inhaled the desert air dust, heat, and a faint tang of promise. Tonight, when I return to my bunker, I will have no power. My radio will fall silent until I scavenge fresh cells, but I won't mind, because tonight I carried hope through a broken world. I ignited a spark in the ashes, and somewhere in the static, I know others heard me. Others will pedal their own patched bikes, their own broken circuits, toward these foothills. They will come bearing tools, seeds, and stories. The climax isn't a single moment. It's a ripple that spreads through fractured lands, binding us in shared survival. It's the choice to give what little you have so that many may live. I stand on that ridge, the pond shimmering below, and whisper into the wind. We endure. We adapt. We rebuild one circuit, one drop, one voice at a time. And in that choice, I find my turning point, not just to survive, but to spark something bigger than myself, something that might just save us all. The night air in the basin remained strangely calm, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation. I slept on the cracked concrete pad beside the pumps, wrapped in a thin blanket scavenged from the WaterGuard Collective's stores. Dawn arrived without fanfare, no shriek of sirens, no roar of lightning, just a pale, smudged sun climbing. Over the foothills, I woke to the steady drip of filtered water into the drum. 50 liters awaited collection, ready to be dispatched down the mountain. My decision to pour every spare part and ounce of effort into this plant had nearly cost me my own lifeline. Back at the bunker, my LEDs would flicker out by nightfall, and my transmitter would go silent until I scavenged fresh cells. Yet, as I sat there, watching clear water pool against the drum's metal side, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in months. Hope distilled into substance. By mid-morning, the first convoy arrived. 5 patched trucks bearing water guards, improvised barrels, survivors, spilled out farmers, former engineers, children with hollow cheeks and eager eyesage, one carrying jerry cans, buckets, pots. They formed a line, trading news and gratitude. I directed them through the filtration rig, demonstrating the valve sequence, the safety checks. Their hands were trembling with relief. Some wept when the first cupful reached their lips. It wasn't a flood, but it was enough to lift parched throats and heavy hearts. That afternoon, I sent a short broadcast, a summary of our achievement, the pump's capacity, and the coordinates. I allowed myself a moment of pride, but tempered it with realism. This water buys us time. It doesn't reset the clock. The earth outside these hills remains broken. But we've proven that even here, in the heart of collapse, ingenuity and cooperation can yield life. On my trek back to the bunker that evening, I surveyed the landscape with fresh eyes. The foothills, once dusty and desolate, clumps of wild mustard sprouting in cracks where moisture lingered. It wasn't a forest, but it was recovery in miniature. The air tasted less of smoke and more of possibility. Inside the bunker, the silence was oppressive. My headlamp flickered twice before the last LED died. I lay on the cold floor, listening to the quiet hum of empty batteries. I imagined the radio waves I was no longer sending, the temperature report for next week's heat wave, the scavenging tips, the Morse code exchanges of solidarity. It felt like a wound a break in connection, yet in the hush I found space to reflect. I remembered the day I lost Anna and my wife, the electric storm that stole them from me. For months, I'd carried that guilt like a stone in my chest, convinced I was cursed to fail everyone. But here, by giving away my tools and my power, I'd enabled dozens to survive. Maybe that's what atonement looks like. Not self-flagellation, but sharing your last loaf so another may eat in the days that followed. Other broadcasts crackled in on 87.5 FM. one from Boise. We've built a second batch of pumps using Harrington's schematic, another from Seattle, battery cells harvested from marine vessels, sufficient to run an LED network for 3 nights, and a brief, joyous code from QZ9, Mill Miss, thank you. Each message felt like a spark in the dark, a network of sparks that might become a blaze of renewal. Nature remained precarious. The heat wave arrived as predicted 6 days of sun-scorched skies and 48 degrees Celsius afternoons. The green patches around the cooling pond wilted and the water levels dipped. Alarmingly, yet every time the mercury peaked, the filtration plant held steady. In that reliability, I saw a mirror of something human, resilience, not as invulnerability, but the capacity to adapt and endure through hardship. Now, as I record this reflection into my inverter-powered recorders, rounded by empty cans and spare wiring, I feel changed. I'm less a solitary survivor, clutching at scraps, and more a link in a chain of living souls. I've learned that survival isn't a zero-sum game. It's a communal effort where giving begets receiving. My guilt over my family's loss has softened into purpose. I carry their memory into each broadcast. Return, toxic rains will fall, but for one brief moment at least, we turned the tide. We drew living water from a poisoned well and passed it hand to hand. And as long as that story echoes through the static, I know that our spark of hope will endure even if I must ride through storms to keep it alive. ChatGPT said, I don't know when I'll find the strength to pedal back out into the dawn, but I know I will, because the worst thing I could do right now is stop moving. Breathing itself is a decision to live, and every circuit I repair, every broadcast I flicker to life, every drop of water filtered through cracked lenses, those are choices to keep fighting. The fallout from the cooling ponds experiment ripples outward now, beyond the foothills. I've heard reports of muddy barrels making their way down the Colorado, past makeshift river crossings and through desert checkpoints. Children once on the brink of collapse are stirring, eyebrows damp with clean water, water trading hands under tense gazes. Not all of them, of course. Some still burn villages where they suspect are pumping rigs, but enough have seen the payoff of cooperation to let us keep our work alive. Hope is fragile an ember held in a trembling hand. A single dust storm, a single raid, a single cracked pipe could snuff it out. The WaterGuard Collective lost to volunteers last week when a flare-up of radiation in pond number 1N, unexpected spike of cesium poisoned their filtration line. They evacuated the site under cover of night, leaving behind empty barrels and scorched metal. I broadcast warnings as soon as I got the data. Avoid pond number 1. We're recalibrating our sensors. Seek backup at QZ9 main station. But every setback feels personal, a scar carved into our collective effort. And yet, if we measure progress not by perfection, but by persistence, then we are winning. The new Phoenician Branch outpost, 90 kilometers east, has erected 3 steel sheds lined with mylar and lead sheeting. They run the leftover molds of resin cartridges through batches of cooling water, swapping out spent media for new thanks. 2 schematics I broadcast 4 nights ago. Their first results, radiation levels down by 70%. Not zero, but far below the acute threshold. They celebrated with a small ceremony a handful of still green sprouts unearthed from soil amendments. We shipped via convoy. I listened to their voices crackling through my patched radio. We're tasting soil again, and I felt something like tears sting my eyes. After months of reciting survival protocols, of metering rationed optimism in syllables, I heard genuine triumph. It warmed me more than any cooling vest ever did. But survival isn't a straight line. I found the roadside lined with wicked spires of vitrified soil places where wildfires had leaped like pipelines and turned the ground into glass. The heat was so intense it fused the concrete and earth together, sealing any chance of regrowth for decades. The air tasted of sulfur and despair. I sat on the blackened ruins and asked myself, is this all worth it? I thought of the barrel, still drumming filtered water in the concrete basin, of the fungus farms humming in the silos, of orphaned children learning Morse code as a second language. I thought of Anna's stuffed giraffe, its button eye dull but intact, tucked into my jacket pocket, and I realized, yes, it is worth it, because even in those burnt scars, seeds may yet find purchase, because every life preserved is a rebellion against the world's collapse, because remembrance and action are two sides of the same coin. But I speak into the static with the conviction that the signal itself matters. If nothing else, it carries proof that we tried, that we endured, that we believed in each other when the world was ready to give up on us. So here is what I leave you with. Hope isn't na vite. It's a tactical choice. When you find yourself rationing the last drops of water, ration your despair instead. Choose to believe in possibilities, even if only to keep your own spirit intact. No one thrives alone here. The loners you see roving the desert, some are brilliant, some are broken. Bridge the gap. Trade your strengths for their strengths. Share your water filtration designs. Swap your spare batteries. Teach the scavengers to read blueprints. Build networks, not fortresses. Thought the world beyond our enclaves remains ruthless. Raiders, storms, toxic rains, their constant threats. Equip yourself. Shield your electronics. Reinforce your shelters. Map the safe routes. Understand your enemy, whether human or natural land. Stay one step ahead. Yesterday's solutions may fail tomorrow. When the ion exchange media became scarce, we switched to biochar from burnt willow roots. When solar panels delaminated, we salvaged heat-resistant glass from nuclear shielding. Use what you find and improvise. Never forget what we lost. Remember the families torn apart by acid rain, the cities swallowed by drought, the forests reduced to glass. Their absence must guide our actions. Let their stories be reasons to persevere, not weights dragging us into despair. I can't promise you safety, plenty, or the return of the blue sky. I can only offer this: if you keep fighting, keep connecting, keep innovating, then you give the future a chance to bloom. Even a single sprig of green through the cracked earth is proof that life finds a way. In the days ahead, I will pedal north again toward new ponds, new communities, new signals hidden in the noise. I'll be a pilgrim chasing water, a broadcaster chasing voices, a survivor chasing purpose. And I will keep speaking into the static, because every word is a spark. So if you're out there, tune in on 87.5 FM. Share your coordinates, your breakthroughs, your fears. Let's map the fractures in this broken world and stitch them together with our shared resolve. We are more than dust and ruin. We are resilience. We are creativity. We are humanity bound by the primal need to live and to care for one another. When this broadcast ends, the desert will still be silent. The sun will still scorch. The dust storms will still loom on the horizon. But somewhere in those storms, you may catch a faint signal of the heartbeat of every hand that cranks a generator, every pair of legs that pedals a bike, every mind that whispers not yet. Hold on to that signal. Let it guide you through the black breath storms and the toxic rains. Let it remind you of the power you hold as a living, breathing being capable of hope, capable of change, capable of survival. Until next time, keep your circuits patched, your canteens full, and your hearts lit. The world is broken, but so are we on. Sometimes a broken thing can be mended into something stronger than before. Stay alive, stay human, and as long as we're breathing, we've still got a chance. Miles Harrington, signing off.